Welcome to another episode of the Hope Strategy Podcast. I am your host, Josh Steinley. I'm running solo today because Corey is out. His wife had a baby. So congratulations to them on their fourth and newest addition to the family. And today we have as our guest Daniel Robinson. Daniel Robinson is the owner of Doggy Jitsu. He's a dog trainer. He trains dogs. He rehabilitates dogs that have been subject to abuse and other unfortunate circumstances. He's also a skateboarder, so he and I enjoy talking about that since I skate as well. But the reason that we had Daniel on the show is because Daniel was also in prison for 11 years. When he was 17 years old, he got involved in a situation that quickly spiraled out of control and landed him in prison on some pretty serious charges, which you'll hear about in the episode. But Daniel didn't give up. He didn't give in to the dark side of things in prison, and he didn't go the way he could have gone. Instead, he made better choices, and he turned his life around. And it's an amazing story, and I'm excited for you to hear it.
Something is happening in our world.
Time is very precious. I'm going to show you how great I am.
Hope in the face of difficulty.
More than machinery, we need humanity.
Hope in the face of uncertainty.
I'm better now than I was. I'm experienced now.
Changing the world can happen anywhere, and anyone can do it.
The audacity of hope.
This is the Hope Strategy Podcast with Corey Blake and Josh Steinley.
All right, I'm here with Daniel Robinson. So Daniel and I are both skateboarders, so we might get a little bit off track during this interview if we start talking about skating and stuff a little bit. But I first heard about Daniel's story from watching an interview of him on the Berrics website. And for those of you who are not into skateboarding, the Berrics is one of the most popular websites for skateboarding in the world, and they have a lot of skateboarding, but they also interview interesting people with interesting stories. And Daniel's one of those people that they interviewed. And you're going to see why his story is so interesting as we get into it here. But to kind of set the stage here, Daniel, tell us a little bit about where you were born and raised, where you're from, what your home life was growing up before we get into the thick of it here with the meat of your story.
I was born in Southern California in 1988, right before the internet, caught on. So I kind of was in that transitional period before, you could go online and research anything in the world. I spent most of my childhood outside or in front of the TV. My parents were split since I was like 2 years old. So I didn't grow up with my dad. My mom was in a relationship with another guy who, throughout time, we didn't always have the best relationship. Things have changed now since I've been out of prison. We've been able to kind of be more amicable and respectful of each other and stuff. But being around that kind of energy as a kid, having older brothers that were, in the streets doing drugs and stuff.
How many siblings do you have?
So yeah, I have 3 older brothers. My older brother that actually he's the reason why I started skating in the first place. He's about 5 years older than me. He's always been pretty straight-laced in terms of like not doing drugs when all of us were. He really focused on skateboarding, was competing in Castle when he was younger. And he did pretty well for himself in those competitions. He got some sponsors, some pretty big name sponsors, actually, Birdhouse, Tracker Trucks. I think he had ridden for a couple of the Soul Tech companies for a little while, America.
Well, that's cool. So he was super into it then.
Yeah, I mean, he was flow on several companies for a while. And I mean, he ripped like probably the best or the most skilled skater to come out of our neighborhood, And so it was really cool to see the skateboarding world, like growing up with that, because like I always got all the hand-me-down stuff. I always got to see like a little bit behind the scenes of what things looked like, not to the fullest extent, but it was just, we were the ones who were always in the know with what was going on, like with skateboarding in our neighborhood. So yeah, all my friends, everybody would always be like, oh, what's going on? I'd be like, oh, have you seen this video? My brother would bring videos home, magazines home and stuff. And like, we just kind of we were like the hub of information for skating in town. And
your other 2 brothers, did they skate too then?
I think they probably messed around with skateboards. I mean, they grew up in the 80s more so, like their younger childhood was in the 80s. So probably my first board was one of their old fishtail boards that was like spray painted and wrapped and given to me for Christmas when I was like 4 years old. My next oldest brother's, he's 10 years older than me to the day almost. His birthday is the day before mine, but 10 years. So,
so there's a bit of a gap there.
Yeah. My brother that's 5 years older than me, Mark, he's actually featured, he does a trick in the Berrics piece, but he's 5 years older than me. My next brother's 10 years older than me. And then my oldest brother is 12 years older than me. They were so much older that I didn't really grow up with them as much. So my brother that skated was more of an influence on me. You know, that's where the skateboarding comes from primarily.
Gotcha. Do you remember that moment of being like, yeah, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to be a skater, or was it a gradual thing?
It was definitely more gradual. Most young kids, you know, you want a bike. And then, you know, in the mid 90s, rollerblading was really a big deal. So I had rollerblades for a little while, which, you know, that's like a point of I don't know, kookery, I guess. I don't know. People didn't look too kindly at rollerblading. And so I never really got entrenched in that. I had them. I messed around, played roller hockey in the streets and stuff like that. But I would say probably around 10 or 11 years old, I finally got like a legit skateboard that, you know, at least was the shape that the one that the pros were using, you know. Mm-hmm. Once I got that, then I took it a little bit more seriously, but I couldn't do any tricks for like 2 or 3 years. And so I didn't take it too seriously. But once I learned ollie and like first landed a kickflip, then I was like, yeah, like it sealed the deal. Like once I could actually do some tricks, you know. Then that was around the time my brother started getting sponsored and making skate videos with his friends. And so that was always like a big influence on my buddies and I. I always wanted to try to get sponsored because I saw my brother getting all kinds of free stuff. And so, you know, I was like, this is what I want to do, you know, until I started smoking weed.
Yeah. So tell us about that. So you're doing skating and everything. And of course, I mean, kids these days and skaters, like, I mean, I grew up skating. I know what it's like when you're out skating with a bunch of buddies and everybody's just kind of, you're by yourself, you're behind buildings because you're trying to find skate spots. I mean, you have a lot of alone time with a bunch of guys and
with some influences.
and especially if you're around older guys and stuff, then I mean, growing up, it was like, I was like the only guy who wasn't doing drugs myself, but everybody else was pretty much.
Yeah, literally everyone.
I had one friend who was like straight edge, so he wasn't doing stuff, but it's like, you know, I mean, everybody's doing stuff. So it's easy to get into.
I was growing up seeing them using drugs, like primarily smoking and not much drinking, but maybe a little bit. It wasn't until a little bit later that I realized they were doing like meth and coke and hallucinogens and other stuff. But the cloud of addiction was kind of always like, you know, dampening my life from a young age. So the transition to like being subject to people using, like to me actually using myself, wasn't that far of a leap, especially once I got around like friends, like you were saying, some of my friends were older and they're already getting high and drinking. And it's like, well, this is what people do, so I'm just going to jump on the bandwagon. It seemed like it was perfectly okay to just get high, you know?
Everybody's doing it.
Even with that going on, I as I started to learn more tricks, I really delved into skateboarding and it became like my everything, you know, like just like every other kid who skates, like you just become completely obsessed with it, right? I would go with my buddies to spots around town, or we would take the bus, you know, to Glendale or downtown LA. And we would seek out all the spots that were in the skate videos and like, oh, dude, so-and-so did that off that gap, or they call this gap, you know, this because it's named after so-and-so. Like going there and seeing it in real time and then thinking like, man, if I could just do something off this and I'll be just like so-and-so, you know. It's akin to using drugs in a sense, right? That adrenaline rush that you get is, you know, similar to like the dopamine release that you get from doing cocaine or something like that. And so it mirrors addiction in a certain way, but obviously it's not something that is like frowned upon the same way because you're not doing harm to yourself. And I mean, you are technically physically, you would be hurting yourself trying tricks, but
Yeah.
like the rush that you get is very similar, you know? And so
Yeah. Without
it's
the
just
brain
kind
damage.
yeah, exactly.
Was there ever a moment where you felt like you were being pulled in separate directions between the skateboarding and the drug use, or were you able to do both of them and they didn't interfere with each other?
I wouldn't say that I was experiencing like this draw from skateboarding away from using drugs. It's like the environment was like we skate and we party, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So the two went hand in hand, but there was a time where I realized that partying was affecting like my ability to do tricks and learn tricks. My first serious girlfriend, she was partying a lot. And so I just kind of was going along with like heavier duty partying, like going to raves and all that. And so taking time away from skating every day to then going and doing like ecstasy and stuff like that, I started to notice a significant drop in my like acuity, like in general, but specifically on my board, you know. It just kind of was like a steady decline after that, you know.
You're skating, you're partying, and then tell us how you got involved in what led to everything that we're about to get into. How did this all go down, and what was the evolution there? Because I'm guessing that was kind of a wake-up call. I mean, it sounded like the situation that you got into it's not like you had been in that situation 10 times before and then all of a sudden this time it got out of control. It was more like you got dragged into something way over your head, it sounds like.
Definitely. When I started partying, you know, you get into that scene and then you meet people and you make connections. And there's a certain point where I realized that I didn't have to spend money on drugs. If I was selling drugs, I could afford to get high for free, basically. I mean, it's not really free. You're paying for it in some way, shape, or form, but I could just do whatever I wanted to do and it would cover it. It would cover itself, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So you start building relationships with people who are connected enough to get you what you want, you know? And so I call him my buddy because I consider him my friend still, right? But my friend Juice was kind of like one of the guys who everybody knew. Everybody was like, oh man, he's the shit. Like he's always got the good stuff. Like when he comes, like he brings the party with him, you know? And so we just started linking up with him a lot more and spending way more time with him. And we all became like a drug selling crew, basically. He'd been doing it for a little while. He's about 10 years older than me. So, you know, he'd been around and he'd been in the scene. He started to, I guess, piss some people off because he was always on top of his game. And a lot of other people were jealous. And so people were trying to set him up to get jacked or what have you. And he just kind of got sick of people trying to play him like that. And
so he was taking business away from other people or something?
Yeah, I think they felt that he just like he was doing too well for himself and it was like affecting their ability to operate. And it's like, well, you can't, you know what I mean? That's the game that you're in, you know, somebody's always going to be hustling harder than you. So he decided that this was the final straw when, you know, these people took a good chunk of his money from him and we didn't really know who had taken the money.
So what's the setup here? Like, how did this all happen? How did these people take the money? Where are you? Where are he? Like where did this all happen and go down?
We were in, you know, a motel, you know, basically like almost like a truck stop motel, but you know, it's closer to LA. I don't know if you know where Sylmar is.
Yeah.
There's a motel there, right? That we had been dealing out of for a few months and people would come and go all the time to buy drugs or whatever. And every time we were getting ready to go to a party, we'd meet up and divvy things up and people would go on their way. While we were there one night, some people that were essentially acquaintances or friends or whoever of Juice's showed up to get some stuff so they can go party. And while they were there, the money came up missing, but he didn't realize until after they had left. So he hit them up, was like, hey, you know, you guys think you could come back? I want to talk to you about something important, right? And so them coming back should have been a sign that maybe if they stole something, they would have just pieced out, right? Mm-hmm. But then we, you know, being high and like being conspiratorial, like with our thinking, we were like, you know, maybe they want him to think that everything's good, that they didn't take anything. So like, you know, they could play it off like it wasn't them or whatever. And as far as I know, it wasn't them, but essentially $7,400 came up missing. And then, it was like, no one's going to leave until we get this money back,
So they came back, and then he's like, hey, my money's missing and nobody's leaving this place until I get my money back. And that's kind of like the first step there, right? I mean, I mean, as soon as he says nobody leaves till I get my money back, then there's kind of a threat, right? That's a crime.
Yeah.
And you're there. And so you're like,
I mean, he's my boy. Like at the time, he's my boy, right? Like my friend and I were like the closest with him. So like there was never any question as to whether like we would back him up, It was like, hey, these people are trying to pull something funny on you. Like, we're not going to tolerate this, right?
But at this point, of course, you're just thinking they'll come back. We'll tell them we need the money back, and then they'll get scared, and we'll get the money back.
Yeah, maybe they'll
and that's
give
it,
the money
right?
or whatever
and no big
happens,
deal.
Yeah. Like at that time, and I was 17, so like I wasn't thinking that far ahead, I'm like, well, somebody's got this money. Where the hell is it? Like, and thinking maybe we'll deal with it this way. I don't know. Like, we'll see. Like, I'm just going to see what he does, And it just spiraled out of control, because at that point now it's like, we searched their car. They didn't have it on them. What did they do? Did they get rid of it somewhere? Like, his mind started going every possible direction. And we're just kind of like, we're along for the ride,
So when did it escalate to kind of the next level from there? Because he doesn't find the money. So now you guys are you back in the motel room?
Yeah, I mean, we hung out in the room that whole night, because basically he's like, hey, you guys.
With these people who.
Yeah, they're in the room with us now.
He thinks took the money.
Essentially, we're falsely imprisoning them, even though nobody had, like, he just said no one's leaving until I get my money. But they were in fear enough for their safety to where they didn't try to leave.
Were they freaking out? I mean, were they scared at this point? Were they
really,
like, uh-oh?
They were we were all just hanging out, and everyone was just really pissed. Like, fuck, we wanted to go party. Like, we'll just wait for him to sort this out. And Juice had decided to leave to go to the party that we were all getting ready to go to, And so he basically left us to make sure that everybody just hung out until he came back. He went to the party and then came back with some people that, like, as soon as they came in, they started to try to get like rough with the four victims, right? And they kind of caught us all off guard, because nobody was getting like physical with anybody, right? Nobody had touched anybody except for like a couple of us like had patted them down to see if they had, a giant bag of money on them, but nobody had assaulted anybody really,
So had he told these people that he brought back? I mean, did he tell them, hey, I've got these people, they took my money, I need you to come and scare them or something?
I can't say that's the conversation that they had. Maybe that's what it was, but they came in like immediately, were like, where's the money? And pushing up on them, intimidating them and all that. And then they were there, and then some other guys came that were really way more serious about everything. Like, they came in with guns, and they had like a couple of the dudes had like bandanas over their face. That, that's when all the crazy stuff started like really happening. A guy pulled the gun out on them. He made them strip down. Like, he was trying to do all these different scare tactics to see what would work to get them to like give up the money, And I wasn't there. Like, I had friends that were there, younger female friends that were going to the party with us, and we had decided that they shouldn't be here. Like, Juice was like, they need to go, And so I like escorted them out. And then when I came back, these dudes had already come. Like, and when I walked in, like, like, I don't want to refer too much to the story. I mean, maybe some of your viewers have seen it or whatever, but as soon as I walk in, the dude's like pointing a gun in my face. He takes my wallet, takes my ID. I see everyone in the room is all like shell shocked, because as soon as he came in, I guess he had made them strip. And so I sit down.
And you're like, wait a second, I'm the buddy of the guy who's running the show here. Yeah. But
well, I was just like, I mean, I never had anybody like point blank with a pistol in my face like that, not like that, like right in my face.
Yeah.
And I was on LSD, and I had been tripping like all night. We were all hanging out partying with these people that would become our victims.
Yeah.
We were all hanging out doing coke and stuff together. So everyone was on edge, but it wasn't a thing until, these guys came in and started like making demands and doing crazy stuff. But I just sat down and just watched the dude do his thing because I didn't want to be the one to step in. Like, what was I going to do? They had guns, and being on acid, like, you don't want to be the one suspected of anything. He's proceeded to like play Russian roulette with them and like try to scare them in any way that he could,
Now, your friend, what's his role? Like, is he losing control of the situation here, or is he still in charge of things?
He, I think, just maybe talked to someone at the party that he knew and was like, "Hey, I got this thing going on. Do you know anybody who can sort this out? Maybe." And then, "Oh yeah, sure, I know a guy." Right? Like, I'm just kind of assuming this is what played out. But once he had that guy come in, that guy was trying to make the victims think that it was his money and that now they got to deal with him.
Gotcha.
And so Juice was like stepping back and letting them just do their thing,
Yeah.
And
okay.
so that's the way it seems like in hindsight, looking back, like, yeah, he just had these guys come in to scare these people into giving the money back or something like that, to know what they actually discussed is completely beyond my knowledge. I don't really know.
Yeah. And that didn't come out in the proceedings later on or anything.
I think when he went to trial, his defense was that he was under duress because maybe these guys were actually like his connect or something. I don't know. I never knew them. This is the first time I'd seen them. So their relationship is a mystery to me. Mm-hmm. And so maybe that it was really the thing, but they had threatened all of us with, "Hey, if anybody snitches, anybody, calls the cops, whatever happens, your families are going to pay." And like, they took my ID, they took everyone else's. So like,
they've got your address.
Yeah. My ID has my address, where my mom lives. And so it's a dude with a gun takes your stuff and says, "If you say anything, I'm going to kill your family." When you're 17 years old and you're on LSD, like, why would I not believe him?
Yeah.
People don't generally just go around with guns, like doing that.
So then what happens?
Yeah. They come to this agreement with two of the victims that they're going to get money from their parents. Right. And so that's like, they're conspiring to commit extortion. Right. Which I guess the victims themselves had suggested that, "Hey, we didn't take your money, but we can get you money." Right.
Yeah. If that's what it takes to get us out of this, we'll find the money, even if we didn't steal it.
Vaguely. That's how I vaguely remember it going down. But I mean, it's so hard to like remember. Specific details stick out more than others, They make that agreement and the guy's like, "Look, you guys better make sure this gets taken care of because I'm coming back." He's like, "I'm going to leave. When I come back, it better be done. Otherwise, we're going to be going out to the desert." And like, he was trying to make it sound like some casino or some Goodfellas, so
yeah,
like going to prison and meeting real killers and looking back in hindsight, like that guy was just playing a part. Not to say that he wouldn't really go there, but what he was doing was scare tactics. It wasn't like he was actually going to do any of this stuff. Otherwise, that's what he would have done. So
it's not exactly convenient for them to have to deal with all that either, right?
No. I mean, and you're going to do this for someone else? Or like, what's your stake in it? If it really is your money, I could understand you wanting to do something about it. But like, you're going to go and kill 4 people, chop them up and bury them in the desert. Like, that's like a Herculean task.
Over $7,500 of somebody else's money.
Yeah. It doesn't make sense. If you look back, It's like, you're just trying to scare these people clearly. And like I said, like, I lived with murderers, in prison, and like, they're not really one to like talk about it in such a casual way. It's like, they've done the deed, so they're going to just do it. They're not going to pretend. They're not going to act tough,
Yeah. They're not going to monologue like people do in the movies and stuff.
Yeah, no, exactly. And so.
Okay. So at some point you guys leave the motel.
It sounds up when I refer to them as the victims, but essentially in court, that's how it's referred to. They have names, but I don't want to put their names out there or anything like that. Would like for them to have their peace in their life. I have no ill will towards them, so, and hopefully they don't bear any ill will towards me, but I could imagine they might, even after all this time. But they had decided that they were going to go and get money from their parents. So 2 of my co-defendants went with them. And when they called their parents, they said, our friends are being held hostage. They're going to be killed if we don't get this money. Their parents immediately call the cops. So the SWAT team raids their car because they were going to meet at a bank or something. I don't know what happened.
And what do you expect parents to do, right? I mean, the parents are just going to be like, oh yeah, let's go along with it.
Oh, sure. They're going to immediately call the cops, In reality, people don't get away with ransom, I mean, maybe it happens a lot in other countries, but in this country, I feel like that gets shut down pretty quick, or people are on the run, and so they arrested 2 of my co-defendants. They even took the 2 victims into custody as well, just because they had to be sure who was what and what's what. Throughout that process, one of them called Juice and was like, everything's you guys got to get out of there. Whatever he said to him. We immediately wiped down the room and then took the other 2 victims into downstairs into the car. And the crazy thing is when we were walking to the car, no one was tied up. No one was being held. We were just walking. So they could have easily took off running.
The guys with the guns were gone at this point. So they left.
Yeah. This was the next day after that. So he left and was like, I'm coming back tomorrow. But then he didn't even come back. And they're like, all right, well, go get the money. What, so pathetic the way that everything happened and how everybody's state of mind. Why did anybody stick around for that? It's just difficult to gauge how someone's going to react in that type of situation, in that state of mind. And so we took them out to the desert because whatever reason, it doesn't make sense why it would even play out this way. But Juice just decided we're just going to go out to the desert because maybe that's what he heard the dude say. But for what? To what end? What's the point of going there? Why wouldn't you just leave them? Had we just left them there and there would have never been any, I never would have been charged with a kidnapping because I never would have moved anybody. But as soon as you move them, it becomes a kidnapping. And then because there was a ransom, then it became kidnap for ransom. And the max term on that is life without the possibility of parole, It would have been so much easier to just leave them. I guess he panicked. And so we went out there and then we thought, hey, we're tough guys now. Let's intimidate them. And it's that what they just went through, they didn't give up or divulge that where the money is. You think we're going to do that now? It just makes no sense. I think we just kind of we saw that go down. We're like, oh, well, we could be badass too, really pathetic.
So how'd you get caught then?
So we ended up letting them go in the whole process of them getting picked up by the cops. They give their statements, they do their, what's called a 6-pack lineup. So they knew people's names, certain names, and then they get people with those names from that area, pictures of them, and it'll be 6 pictures in each one. And they'll look at the pictures and see the name, oh, that's the guy. Okay, well, what did this guy do to you? And so they were able to take that statement to issue warrants. And then basically I thought I was on the run for a few weeks, but it turns out they hadn't actually been looking for us yet, or not officially, because they didn't quite know specifically who was who. Once they had figured that all out, then they started to really cast a net or whatever. We went up to San Francisco for a night or whatever. And when we were coming back, I went to this Motel 6 and the cops, I guess it was in Ventura County, the sheriff was driving around looking for a runaway, I guess, that I resembled. I fit the description. And so they pulled me over and I had some hash in my pocket. And so they arrested me and I lied to them about who I was because I thought there was a warrant. And it turns out that there wasn't a warrant. So they booked me for providing false information, for lying about who I was. And then when I was getting transferred to LA County, it was right around the time that they issued the warrant. So when I was getting processed out, they're like, hey, you got a warrant, and so my bail was $2.2 million because of kidnap or ransom, false imprisonment, all this other stuff.
So you were in jail for a few days before they were going to let you out, or how long?
I think it was
that?
2 weeks.
2 weeks.
2 weeks.
So you're in jail for 2 weeks because you were lying to the officer. I mean, if you hadn't lied, you would have been just slap on the wrist type thing, right?
Would it have been? They would have gave me a ticket for possession. Maybe they would have tried to get me for sales because back then, weed wasn't legal in California, and like hash is more concentrated and stuff. But they would have maybe just taken me home. Yeah, because they're like, "What are you doing out here? You live over there." They would have taken me home. Would have been a ticket for possession, whatever, right?
But instead, you go to jail for 2 weeks, and then you're leaving, and then the warrant comes out for the serious stuff.
Yeah, and they're like, "Okay, you're not going anywhere."
Yeah.
And then so I spent 21 months fighting my case, 19 months in the county jail, 2 months in juvenile hall.
And were you tried as an adult? Because you were 17 years old when this all went down.
Yeah, so in California, if the crime is like heinous, more heinous, right, as they referred to, wouldn't describe the crime as being heinous necessarily, but it's serious, very serious and violent, right? So because it was right when I was going to turn 18. So like maybe if I was 16, it would have been a little bit different, but like by the time I was in custody, I was just turning 18. So they tried me as an adult. Well, I wasn't tried, but they sentenced me as an adult, right? So I went straight from juvenile hall to LA County jail, fought my case. Then I took a plea bargain for 14 years and 4 months with one strike.
I've never been in jail.
Yeah.
So I'm just thinking about the 2 weeks in jail.
Yeah.
I'm like, that would probably have freaked me out enough, just being in jail for those 2 weeks. But then to be charged with those crimes and be like, oh man,
you're a grown up now.
I'm going away for years.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, how many times were you like freaking out about this? Just being like, oh my goodness, like what is going to happen to me?
I mean, when I got arrested, I was on acid that time too, right? And so I'd never been like detained and had to stay in jail, right? Like I'd been arrested several times, but it's like holding tank. Mom comes, picks me up, I get a ticket, or whatever. It's an arrest. I go to court later on. I pay a fine, whatever it is, right? But this time was like, no one can come pick you up. You're being detained, pending whatever hearings that you got to have. So the first day was like catastrophic for me, like being locked in a cell on acid, the best acid I'd ever taken, So I went from like the craziest trip to the shittest situation, Once the dust settled from that, each next step was like, may have been a bigger blow, but I like was better at coping with it because it was like already my whole world was turned upside down. So I just got better at coping with it. And then once I started to detox and my brain started functioning again and I started growing emotionally, I got better at dealing with the information. And with
how long did that take?
I mean, months and months. And it didn't, like, even when I got to prison, I was still like another blow, right? You're a violent offender. You can't go to certain places like fire camp, where living conditions would be much cushier, right? So that was like a big slap in the face. But, just with emotional maturity, mental maturity, like I got better at coping with stuff. Not that it was necessarily any easier to hear, it's just, you just get so used to the disappointment, going through it for years and years that, like, it's like, whatever, this is how life is now. Right. But when I was sitting in there, like it was almost unfathomable for me to think that I could be doing life in prison for something I did when I was a kid. Right. Once you really make that connection, I mean, I spent, like I said, almost 2 years fighting my case. That's 2 years of not knowing whether or not I was going to do life in prison. Kind of had it in the back of my mind, like, I'm not going to do life for this. But every time you go, it's like, oh, you could take 13 years. You could take 15 years with 2 strikes. I'm like, that's not really a deal, Like being that young,
Mm-hmm.
going to prison, like I might have to do something crazy the day that I get there, and now I'm struck out and I never get to go home. You know, wasn't until they offered us a deal with just one strike that, you know, I started to think, yeah, you know what, I'm not going to do life in prison right now. You know, like I'm going to take this deal. It's the hardest pill you're going to ever have to swallow. But, you know, at that point, you've been swallowing the worst pill day in and day out. Suck it up. I mean, you should have the mental fortitude at that point to just be like, all right, I'm going to take what's coming to me.
What was it like getting sentenced then?
It was a relief, but also it's like, now that like, it's like closing the book on that like it's like closing that chapter, and now I'm opening up the next chapter, which is vastly more uncertainty as to like what's going to happen day in and day out. Like I know this is the finish line here, right? But that's, at that point, was over 10 years away.
Yeah, and it's not like it's a easy, cushy ride during those 10 years. I mean, you're going to prison with a lot of crazy dudes.
You don't know what to expect. Like people, you know, when you're in county jail, there's older guys that have been through it. That they're doing what's called life on installment. It's like just a revolving door for them. And so they'll be like, oh yeah, man, you get here and get there, you get your TV, blah, blah, blah. You find some good guys, blah, 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 play cards, like whatever their program has been in the past. Like, oh, everything's good, right? Like, no big deal. You know, you might have to do this, you might have to do that, blah, 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 right? You still don't really know what to expect. And a lot of bad things that I heard might happen, didn't happen. And then there's a lot of things that I heard that were going to be good that didn't happen. There's also a lot of crazy stuff that I didn't expect to happen that I saw, you know, or that I experienced. And like, you can't be sure what it's going to be or when it's going to happen, but there's going to be shit that you did not expect that's going to come and slap you in the face. But I learned from very early on that essentially I have to make the right decisions. I have to make the right choices. I got to mind my own business, and I got to make sure that I follow the rules and don't offend anybody, you know? That little formula, I didn't articulate it to myself, but I just kind of knew intuitively that there was a certain way that I had to conduct myself to avoid as many problems as possible. I feel like I steered my way through that pretty well.
So what were you holding on to during this time to say, hey, I'm going to make it through this. I'm going to get out okay. There's still hope for my life.
Yeah.
Like, what were the thoughts that you were repeating to yourself to get through all this?
My family, before I went away, I had such low self-worth. Like, nobody loves me, whatever, nobody cares. I thought that way about my family. And then certain members of my family really stepped up and really were like, we got your back. Like, we want you to do everything you can to make this a positive, right? And so they really pushed for me to recognize that they're there for me, right? That they didn't want me to think I was all alone. And so that support system, it kind of allowed me to realize, you know, I'm not a lost cause. So everything I do is going to be geared towards like self-optimization, right? Like what can I do to make sure this never happens again, you know? And so I started taking education really seriously. I was getting into church and Bible study and all that stuff real early on. I mean, I veered away from that, but it really led me to understand how important having faith in whatever it might be, but particularly, you know, in a higher power or in my own ability to, or not necessarily my own ability, but in an ability to overcome something, right? Whatever it might be. I just had this feeling like, now that I have a clear head, I have a blank slate that I can, you know, write whatever I want on, or I could paint whatever picture, you know, I could fill my mind with whatever information I want to fill it with. And I decided I don't want that to be prison war stories and, you know, reminiscing about using drugs and partying. I want it to be all the things that I'm interested in from here on out, like things that are practical, things that are educational, things that are uplifting, whatever it is, right? Science. business, like things that I never learned going to school. Like now I get to decide what I put in my brain. Just a thirst for knowledge, I think, is one of the biggest factors, you know?
So one of the things that's impressed me throughout this, through the other interviews I listened to with the Berrics and here talking to you, is I don't feel like you're playing the victim or blaming anybody else for anything during this whole story. Like you're taking responsibility for what you did. And there isn't any hint that you're like, yeah, I was unfairly treated, or this. Is that how you felt back then? Or is this something that you came to during this process?
I mean, it's easy. It's so easy for us to feel self-pity, right? Like, especially because that's how the whole like first 16, 17 years of my life was. I was always like, oh, but what about me? Like always crying about like things that I felt were unjust, but it was really just my ego, or my perspective was that I was getting shafted all the time. Right. And like, I realized at a certain point, like, I can't blame anybody else for my decisions. Right. Even at that young age where legally I'm not as culpable as an adult would be. Right. Like there's been Supreme Court case to determine, just how much potential for like remorse and understanding of one's actions that a child has, right? Those aspects of an adolescent brain those areas of the adolescent brain aren't quite developed enough, right? So there is a certain amount of diminished culpability, but even with that, I didn't say, oh, well, I just didn't know, even though I didn't. It's like, hey, I made this choice. I made my bed. I have to sleep in it, as much as I didn't want to have to admit that, it's the truth, Mm-hmm. I can't sit here and be like, oh, if you wouldn't open your mouth, or if you didn't say this, or if so-and-so wasn't such a like we would have gotten through this. Like, no, like shut the hell up. Just get your head in the books. Like make sure this doesn't happen again, Yeah.
Taking responsibility for what happened before seems to have allowed you to take responsibility now for your life. And now you've turned things around and you've made things better.
Yeah.
I mean, you could be sitting here just ruminating about what happened, but instead you're going forward.
I mean, don't get me wrong. Everybody has those moments where they're like, son of a bitch, this person lied to me, or if I would have just been given this opportunity, like I can't help but think about the ways that my life should have and could have been better when I was younger, but it's irrelevant at this point, right?
Yeah, it's happened.
Like, am I going to let that dominate my thought process now, or am I just going to do what I need to do to take care of myself and my loved ones? Because dwelling on how things could have been is just like you're living in the past.
So you ended up spending how much time total in prison?
With the county, with juvenile hall, the county jail, prison, and then I stayed in a halfway house program. After I left, it was a total of 11 years and 7 months, roughly. Because I did so much college, I was able to earn a substantial amount of time off once the Prop 57. So Anti-Recidivism Coalition, and I think it was Human Rights Watch. I don't know. There's a bunch of organizations that were working on drafting legislation to assist with criminal justice reform. And Proposition 57 was one that opened the door for violent and serious felons in the state of California to earn time off their sentence, where before we couldn't, right? So for the first 10 years of my term, I got what's called work time credits, which is 15% of the total time that I'm serving is taken off for work time, right? So as long as I'm participating positively in whatever program they dictate, which is either a job or, substance abuse, whatever your assignment is in prison, right? Could be school, could be anything. As long as you're just doing that and you have that status, you earn a certain amount of time off, right? So they say you're doing 85% of your total term, whereas nonviolent offenders would get 50%. Once they passed Prop 57 now, violent offenders were given, I think, another 5% off. And then or I can't remember exactly what it was, but they were getting another small percentage reduction on their work time, but now could earn good time credits, which consisted of like merit credits for completing programs, rehabilitative achievement credits. And basically, if you earn like a GED or a college degree, each one you can earn a certain amount of time more off for that, right? So I didn't get any credit for my GED, but I got credit for my associate's degrees, which was 6 months for each one or each level. So I got 6 months for that. I got several weeks off for milestone credits, and then I went to that program about 8 months early. So all in all, for my max term, I got close to 3 years off of what would have been 14 years and 4 months. I got down to 11 years and 7 months roughly.
So during this 11 years plus that you're in prison, were there times that you got depressed and just super down about things?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like, day in and day out, you go through, natural oscillations of feeling sorry for yourself, or, feeling really optimistic. Like when I really hit the books really hard, it just started like really firing off a lot of intellectual potential that was like locked away, because I started making all these connections. Like my brain's working now, I'm learning new things, and I would see something that I read here, and then I would think about it like, damn, well, like I started plugging a lot of things in. That made me more optimistic than I'd ever been. That's like a natural high,
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I realized like my mental, like the way my brain works when I'm not on drugs is way more preferable to being on drugs. Like I realized like being, under the influence of substances, it depressed my thinking ability, my cognition, and makes me feel like I'm boxing myself in, even though I've had like out-of-body experiences, life-changing trips on different hallucinogens. Like, sure, it's all expand your mind, like all this shit, like that's all well and good, but I'm at this point now where my brain and my mind, it's doing that naturally. You know what I mean? Because I'm learning, I'm actually using it instead of using some other outside substance to catalyze some kind of response.
That's fascinating. As somebody who's never done drugs, this is really interesting to me to listen to, because I'm like, oh, that is super interesting, because I do get that high off of learning and skating and doing this other stuff, but I don't have a basis for comparison the way that you do. So it's interesting to hear it from your point of view to say, yeah, these things are similar, but also different.
There's some experiences that you're just never going to have, like if you don't take those substances, or if you don't like do some kind of weird breathing technique to make it happen naturally, right? Like, you learn how to like naturally secrete serotonin or dopamine or something, just by sitting here and meditating. Like you have to use some kind of substance, and those experiences they have value in and of themselves if you're doing it with the right intentions. I don't know. My brain is not comfortable and my body's not comfortable being in that like artificial state of arousal. I got to a point where I feel so much more content not being on some kind of substance that, I don't want it,
Isn't it kind of interesting to watch all these skaters go through these stages? I mean, you've seen this with Andrew Reynolds and all sorts of other skaters where they're like mean. They're off the deep end, and then it's like they get clean, and you can tell like they're happier for it, but it's almost like everybody has to go through their own journey, their own process.
A bunch of skaters that went to prison, like Andy Roy, in and out, but he's been locked up a few times. And, he's been struggling with addiction and all that. And it's like, it seems to be a very prevalent thing in skateboarding that people, they at some point they got to battle their demons, or some people don't. They just have a good time or continue to live whatever lifestyle they want. But it really is interesting to see how much insight they have after they've gone through that. Like you look at Neen Williams, he's doing so much more than anybody would ever expect to see from a skater. Like he has like endorsement deals with Whole Foods. He's really taken the health and the wellness to a whole other level where, you know, a lot of guys may be living that lifestyle, but now he's like parlaying that into business and, you know, just awareness and like, he's kind of creating a template for people who mistreated their body, who have, you know, mistreated their mind and kind of just lived hard and fast, to then turn that around and say, hey, like, look, dude, like, if you do these workouts, if you eat these foods, you'll be able to extend the longevity of your career. You'll be able to consistently increase your skill level. Like, if you just take that same like lust for enjoyment and self-gratification that you had when you were using drugs, and you apply it to, you know, optimizing yourself, you'd be unstoppable.
So I'm listening to this and I'm thinking about the parents out there who have, I mean, like, I've got a 10-year-old son and he's so into skating. I mean, he's better than I am now. It's blowing me away how fast he's progressing. But like, I'm trying to prepare him because I know that he's going to be exposed to all this stuff as he grows up. And so I'm trying to prepare him. But like, from your perspective, what advice would you have for parents out there who are saying, how do we just help our son or daughter to just skip this, you know, like catch them when they're 14, 15, 16, so they can just skip ahead to the clean life and like not go through all that hard stuff to get there?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think that you can prevent that from happening necessarily. What it comes down to, and I think it's super important, the younger that children are, is to really instill the virtues, the values, the ethics that you want to see them employ in their life. The way that I was when I was young was, I always would hear that my dad was homeless, living under a bridge, doing heroin. Like, to me, that was like a normal thing to hear. And seeing my brothers use drugs, that was such commonplace that it didn't occur to me that that was not acceptable, you know, in the grander scheme of society. And so that stopgap, or whatever you want to call it, that didn't exist for me. So like, instead of parents trying to prevent their kids from doing the wrong thing, you need to really instill what the right thing is as early as possible, so that their code of ethics is so embedded in them, and it's so strong that they'll be able to think critically about these things that come up. Like, you know, this is contrary to everything that I believe is right and wrong. So I'm like, they're going to make the better choice on their own organically, from what they learn from infancy on. Their code of ethics or their sense of morality will be much stronger, so that they'd be less swayed by outside influences, right? They'll have a stronger sense of self. So then they won't think, oh, I need to do this to be accepted by so-and-so. It's like with kids that grow up, they know what they want to be from such a young age. Like, you look at like pop stars, like someone like Taylor Swift, like as soon as she learned how to play the guitar, she immediately started writing songs, and she knew that's what she was going to do for the rest of her life, right? So like, if you can tap into that at a younger age and have that the right lessons be learned at the right time, they're going to make the right choice, right? When they're faced with that difficult decision, you know, there has to be a balance between discouraging the wrong stuff and encouraging the right stuff, right? It's like, if you can't get them at that young age, like right now for you have a 10-year-old son, you know, if you don't have that framework in place, right? If you're just kind of coming to this and like, you're getting blindsided by, hey, you know, this kid introducing weed to your son or something like that, that's a whole different beast, right? Because their sense of self is already developed into whatever it might be. And so you don't know if you've done everything you can to help them learn how to make the right choices.
Yeah. Seems like a lot of open conversation, communication, and maintaining a good relationship. I mean, because if you don't have the relationship, you can't even talk to your kids about this stuff, right? Because they're not going to listen.
Yeah, they're going to be like, what the hell do you know, right?
Yeah.
You know? Like if they won't even listen to you on the basic stuff, right? You can't expect them to listen to you when the hard questions present themselves, you know?
Now, when did you get out?
2 years ago.
So 2 years ago, you got out. Tell us about your life since then, what you've been able to do.
When I was in the halfway house, I was going to school. I was on an ankle monitor. I was trying to kind of fill in some of the gaps so I could transfer to university, but I had been in the program, the positive change program in prison, learning how to train dogs and rehab dogs. And so I knew that I was going to start some kind of dog business. I had anticipated doing like a walking business, but private training is very little overhead. So it was a no-brainer that I would do private training individually. But I started working at a facility in LA that does boarding and training, and it's like a daycare. I worked there for 4 months, kind of got to see how a facility like that functions. And then I decided to kind of branch out on my own. And I really wanted to get a gauge for what the market looks like. I wanted to learn more skills potentially, or what their philosophy was. Like, I didn't have all the pieces to the puzzle yet. I mean, I still don't, but I have many more of them now. I learned what I could from there. There's much more that I could have learned, but I got to a point where it's like, I need to take the next step right now, or I'm going to drive myself crazy. So I started my own business. That didn't take off right away. Growing up poor in that transitional age, you know, with the internet coming out, and not growing up with the internet, and then going to prison where you can't have access to the internet, very limited knowledge of computers, you know, getting out, trying to market myself online without having an understanding of that. That was a whole set of hurdles that I had to kind of get over, which I'm still figuring that out. Like, it's not the easiest thing in the world to design a website, you know, unless you have.
We've got a digital marketing agency right here. We can help you out.
Well, I mean,
this.
I have support, and like my girlfriend has helped me like tremendously, probably more than any human being has ever helped me. She was able to kind of get me on track with that. But, you know, when I started.
Was it crazy getting out and then like Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and all this stuff? And you're just like, wait, what is all this stuff?
Well,
like,
I was thinking to myself, like, you know, I communicate with people face to face every day in prison. There is no intermediary device that, you know, that we have to rely on. And like, I'm like, well, you know, that's not going to affect how I communicate that much. When I got out, I was like, damn, literally everything is online. Like, you do your banking online, you communicate with people around the world online. Like, this is just how society functions. And I was like, if you want to participate in society on that level, you have to become adept at using these devices.
COVID hits and it's like that much more.
Yeah.
We're
completely reliant
and
on
not face to face. Yeah.
Yeah. It's crazy. Like, so much optimism, a lot of uncertainty, but a lot of optimism. And then something like a global pandemic. And it's like what the fuck, you know? But,
so how's your business doing now?
It's doing pretty well. I got my business card set up with my name, Doggy Jitsu. I got my website up and running. You know, we're on a 10-acre ranch. We have this room is the dog gym, essentially, right? I put some human stuff in here, but we do a lot of our training, a lot of our exercising of dogs in here. We have land to work with. We're doing really well for ourselves, right?
So you got your business, Doggy Jitsu, like jujitsu, and you can find your business at doggyjitsu.com. And if you search for Doggy Jitsu on Instagram, you can find Daniel's business there. And if you're in Southern California, you can hire him to train your dog. Yeah. So the business is doing well. You seem to be doing well. You're healthy and everything. Yeah. What's the future looking like for you?
You know, over the past couple of years, right, we've just made a lot of strides. You know, I went to Washington, D.C. to promote the Positive Change Program. Over that time, I really started to kind of think about, in what ways is like dog food lacking, dog treats. Like, I just come up with all these different ideas of how I can maybe do things better or provide some different kind of, like, some alternative to whatever the options are. Mm-hmm. And so I'm hoping to break into different kinds of merchandise, my logo on it, like clothes, you know, and other things that are dog related. But also I have some ideas that I want, like, I wouldn't say inventions, but just things that I want to come out with that are favorable to what's on the market. So some product development is kind of what I'm hoping to do in the next several months. Other than that, you know, I'm working on expanding my brand as much as I can, expanding my services, maybe taking on some employees, you know, maybe in different areas, just to kind of get the word out there. You know, there's a significant need for what we do in terms of like dog rehabilitation. What we do essentially with dog rehabilitation, it's watered down version of what Cesar Millan does, you know, what he teaches. And so like, there's a lot of people, trainers that probably watch his show and think, oh, well, I could do that, but don't quite get the essence of it. And so it's not that common to find someone who works in that field. That is like, it's just, there's not that many of us that do what we do. If I can, you know, expand my brand by teaching people in other areas that, you know, if they want to come in and shadow, they can kind of learn how we run things and then take it back to wherever they are. If they wanted to start their own business, whatever. But, you know, if I have friends or family that live in other areas that I can kind of get, you know, pull them in and get them started and stuff, that's something that I'm considering in the near future. Other than like my dog training business, you know, have some other things going on. I started a YouTube channel called Skate Breed, SK8 Breed. And it's just kind of showcasing like my like redevelopment of my skateboarding. I wouldn't necessarily call it skills, even though like ultimately it is a skill. I'm just trying to get some shred of what I had back and also, you know, progress and try to do new stuff that I never really did before. And like, you know, having basically a mobile production studio in your pocket, all the skate videos I never got to make when I was a kid, I can kind of make now, you know, and I can do the music, I can do the, you know, all the editing and stuff right on my phone. So,
and I saw you're getting your tricks back, right?
Yeah, I'm working on that. Yeah.
I was watching some of your Instagram clips, you're getting your switch flips and stuff. And
yeah,
what I love about your story, Daniel, is that you got into some trouble. You made some bad decisions. You got into some trouble. You ended up in prison for 11 years.
Yeah.
And yet you didn't let that stop you. You changed your choices and you turned it into something positive. And here you are. You're an entrepreneur. You've got a business. You're back skating. You've got a girlfriend. You're in a relationship. Like, you're making a life out of this. And this isn't what we see in the movies, right? We see people go to prison and then it's like, then they just get more hardcore and stuff. And we don't see that, hey, people can go through hard times like this, but you can come out on the other end and be okay and do something with yourself still.
Yeah, I think things like, you know, I mean, everybody likes a happy ending. Everybody likes a redemption story and stuff, but like, it happens more than we realize, but significantly less than it should, you know, considering how many people go to prison and how many people just keep going back, right? Like the recidivism rate in California is like upwards of 80%. So the number of people who are getting out, staying out, building a life for themselves, you know, contributing to society in some way, it's significantly lower than it should be, right? That we'd like to admit. You know, so it's great that, you know, that you're willing to kind of highlight my story, my situation. It's totally possible, you know?
If there's one thing that you could change about the prison system, what would it be? One thing.
The way that I would change prison is completely revamping it, right? Like I don't want to go to the fullest extent to say like we just need to get rid of it, but it has to take on a drastically different form for it to function in the way they claim that it should be functioning, right? There's a lot of things that I would change. you can't expect to put a bunch of maladaptive people into a fishbowl together and have things work out, right? It's all one giant measuring contest with people who are extremely emotionally damaged, behaviorally unsound. Like, there's just so much trauma, so much. You can't expect these people in that environment to be deprived of everything but whatever maladaptive like traits they developed and expect them to function. And then you can't just have people come in and be like, oh, well, the research on this program is very promising, let's just implement it here. And it's like, yeah, on paper that looks great, but in practice it falls flat on its face. And almost every single program is like that.
Every single program is, how do we take this existing system and improve it a little bit? And you're saying the whole system's broken from the bottom up.
Yeah, I mean,
or top down, or whatever.
Especially with all the crazy stuff that's going on with defund the police and abolish prison and all this stuff. Like, you can't just take that out and expect society to keep functioning.
I honestly hope that someday we can have you back on and we can talk more about prison reform and stuff, because this is something that's super fascinating to me and is definitely part of the theme here with the Hope Strategy podcast, the type of thing that we want to cover. But thank you so much, Daniel, for giving us all this time. It's been super interesting. Without hesitation, I can say that you are a very different guest than the others that we've had on this show so far. And the people who are going through these sequentially, they're going to be like, whoa, what the hell happened? This is crazy. This is really different. So thank you so much for being on. Yep. Thank you so much for being on, and we wish you all the best and hope to stay in touch.
Absolutely.
Hello, it's Corey here, and I just want to thank you so much for listening into the Hope Strategy podcast. I hope you're enjoying it as much as we are enjoying having these amazing conversations with these incredible individuals talking about hope. We'd love it if you wouldn't mind liking, subscribing, and leaving us a review on iTunes or Spotify or anywhere that you listen to your podcasts, and share it with anybody you feel that can benefit from these messages of hope. Thank you so much for listening to the Hope Strategy podcast.